Literary computing can doubtless continue as an invaluable assistant to scholarship, as Susan Hockey has said, following criticism wherever it goes and trying its best to be of service. But scattered evidence from literary computing, particularly computational stylistics, the compelling nature of the questions its failure raises, and the obvious benefits of hooking up with the discourse of criticism suggest that brokering Martindale's Leibnizian marriage of theorist and empiric is worth the candle. However ghettoized it may be in specialist periodicals, literary computing remains an underdeveloped rather than a moribund research program. The question is, what now can be done? In humanities computing, I took up part of the task by concentrating on the theoretical implications of computing as an analytical approach to the study of the humanities as a whole. I presented a negative epistemology, arguing that the primary function of computing is not to automate knowing, but to identify what we somehow know but cannot adequately specify, thus Bruegel. Because computing gives us a manipulatory power over the models we construct, we are able rapidly to close on that which cannot be formulated. Thus, we are confronted with our own quite specific ignorance of cultural artifacts, and so are better equipped to question them. For literary studies, this epistemology takes computing significantly beyond the standard view of an efficient but essentially mute and obedient handmaiden by challenging us in detail to account for the failure of any rigorously analytical try for a systematic order of things. But here is my repudiation of my recent book. It takes us no further than the negative gift with positive consequences that lie somehow beyond what any such try can in principle do. It leaves us at the edge of the abyss with no help. The fundamental problem raised by all observational instruments is, as Ian Hacking has argued for microscopy, that we don't just peer through them to newly visible objects that are as we see them to be independently of the viewing. We must also, he argues, interfere with the incoming data based on what we know of what we are trying to observe. We must make sense with these data, sometimes by intervening in the observational process, sometimes by altering the object of study. This we simply cannot do or do well without a good idea of what we are looking at. In literary studies, such knowing interference is not, as in the sciences, so much a preliminary step toward consensus about the object in view. Rather, it is an ongoing, never-ending process. The literary object in view is hardly an object at all, but the contingent, interactive, emergent outcome we wisely use a gerund to name: reading. For centuries, the Codex book, this is the Nestle-Aland edition of the New Testament, the Codex book has functioned as just such an instrument, or as I.A. Richards said in 1926, a machine to think with. For centuries, it has encouraged interpretative interference with the flow of language, even, for example, in critical editions and commentaries, providing optional sequences of interfering moves. And there are more optional sequences on this opening of the book than you can shake a stick at. This book requires serious training in order to use. To us, apt to view it from the outside, the Codex appears as a meta-theoretical statement articulated by such moves. A meta-theoretical statement, that's Jerry McGann's term. Computing foregrounds these, but because computing is also a gerund, not a name for an action or a set of actions, but a name for acting, its kind of book is less a meta-theoretical statement or even a map of possibilities than a device for trying things out, an experimental instrument. But computing's shift of emphasis from representation to intervening, while clearly experimental in character, also drives constant theorizing in response to what has just happened and in preparation for the next move. For this reason, the tools we use must be theoretically capable to the highest degree at the most basic level of their design. If computing is to be pursued as a way of critical acting on literature, then much more than the epistemological question is at stake. To be brought to ask how we know what we somehow know, but cannot represent computationally, is, I assert, a major step forward. But it is preliminary to asking the ontological question Wittig and others raised at the end of the 1970s and McGann again two decades later. What is text that eludes all such representations? That it can be, in McGann's words, the hem of a quantum garment. Jerry has a wonderful gift for phrases, and this is one of the best. The hem of a quantum garment. Analytical literary computing tells us how to exploit the unavoidable difference between textual representation and reality, but it has absolutely nothing to say about what we choose to represent. Even if we limit the textual objects of study to its verbal data, trouble starts with the context required for interpretation. The dominant consensus within a critical specialism may obscure the problem, and often does. People in a discipline tend to agree with each other more than they disagree, even though it doesn't look like it. But we are warned of it by the crippling difficulties of infinite regress that the very idea of context appears to cause whenever anyone asks exactly what it is a promissory note for. Context, Jonathan Culler remarked, is merely more text, and so to appeal to it solves nothing. But appealing to it, particularly if it is to be modeled computationally across the open domain of literature or of real life, reveals how unsatisfactorily arbitrary and limiting the unspoken notion or any analytic formulation of it is. The problem of context is the problem of text. What is it? By failing to ask the Wittig-McGann question, what is text? Literary computing is confined to providing evidence for or against what we already know or suspect. It is strongly inhibited in its capacity to surprise. Providing evidence seems justification enough, you may think, but evidence becomes increasingly problematic as the volume of data exceeds the norm for critical practices formed prior to the exponential growth of online resources. And that embraces nearly everyone, if not everyone, in this room. As this volume increases, so does the probability of arbitrary choice, and so the ease with which any statement may be connected to any other statement. Good critics may do better scholarship by finding more of what they need. Bad critics may be swiftly becoming worse ones more easily. The point, however, for people like me, is that literary computing has thereby served only as an obedient handmaiden, and so done nothing much to rescue itself from its position of weakness, from which it can hardly deliver the benefits claimed for it by the faithful. It has done little to educate us methodologically. There is, of course, no single answer to the Wittig-McGann question, because there are many kinds of text, many ideas of what to do with each kind, and every reason to think that these kinds and ideas are limited only by human ingenuity, which shows no sign of going away. There is only the questioning. Given the renewed prominence that McGann's work has brought to the question, what can be done is to develop ways of asking it such that responses can be made in as well as with software. An obvious starting point is with the inherited tools of reference, for example, lexicons, critical editions, and commentaries, inferring from them the ideas of text they implement. To the degree this has been done in aid of speculating about or designing a software equivalent, results suggest the prominent role of tacit uses in the social contexts of argument and in the building or maintaining of a social imaginary. I will return to the importance of this later. Results also illumine the primitive crudity of our software tools. Let's take a brief look at them to see what it is that they teach us.